Welcome to Seaside Joe. I'm Kenneth Arthur. Today I want to talk about the Seahawks and trading down in the first round of the draft. This is what I find to be the most likely thing that Seattle will do when the draft starts on April 28th. And I believe that the Seahawks will trade down for a few reasons. One being, I think it's just a very weak class, not just the quarterbacks, which is going to be a reason for why Seattle probably will trade down. If there were 2 or 3 quarterbacks in this draft worthy of going in the top 8, then the best tackles and edge rushers would fall to the Seahawks at pick 9. We know that Seattle is not very likely to trade up, and we know that maybe they shouldn't, because also, in addition to the quarterback class not being that great, the other classes, the other positions are not that great either. If you want more content about the Seahawks in the draft, go to seasidejoe.substack.com. As you can see, there's a post at least once a day, often 2 to 3 times per day leading up to the draft. And you can find out more about these classes like the cornerbacks or the wide receivers and why it's just not that great of a class. Even if you go to, the other positions, it's not just quarterback. And most people agree here that the quarterback class is being called fairly weak, and you look at last year in the 2021 NFL draft, you had very classic top quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, who would have gone in the top 2 spots in most draft classes and obviously had all those traits that you would look for. And then teams reached really for Trey Lance and Justin Fields, and then Mac Jones fell where he fell in just a really suitable fit with the New England Patriots at 15. But even then, I don't know that the Patriots would have picked Mac Jones at 15. It was just the class that you had there. And it's not going to be that case this year. Most of the drafts in the last 20 years, really, ever since Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf in 1998, most of the drafts that you would see have those 2 quarterbacks at the top, if not 3 or 4. And that's been a trend going on since, really 98 with Leaf and Manning. If you go back before then, it wasn't really that common. And almost always it's this idea of the traditional pocket passer. He's not the most mobile, but he's a really fast processor, reads the defense, has a cannon, this sort of thing like Peyton Manning. And then you've got the guy that goes off book. He's mobile. He's maybe more of the quote unquote future. He's more exciting. Maybe he's creating plays off of the playbook, outside of the structure of the play. And this may be more like, Ryan Leaf doesn't really fit the full mold like so many other guys that we could name here, from Donovan McNabb to, Trey Lance and Justin Fields, and really even like you could say that Zach Wilson and Ryan Leaf, this kind of similar in that way that they look very comfortable running around in the backfield and figuring out a way to, get something drawn up in the dirt and to gain a first down or a touchdown. It's something that, as opposed to the more statuesque Trevor Lawrence types or Mac Jones, and this year you don't have either of those. You do have Malik Willis and people talking about the athleticism that Malik Willis brings, but he's got nothing to offer in terms of those heights of being a passer. He does have the best arm strength maybe in the class, but there's no accuracy. He's not going seemingly off of a playbook, and he's playing against the likes of Old Dominion and not playing against the type of competition. And even then, he didn't have the greatest season last year for Liberty. He wasn't even the top quarterback, you would say, at the Liberty level. So, there are those weaknesses at quarterback, but I think you're also seeing those weaknesses at tackle, edge rusher. There is no Walter Jones, Orlando Pace, Jonathan Ogden, Trent Williams. I would even say there's not even a Russell Okung in this draft right now. Every other tackle, from Evan Neal to Ike Ekwonu, these guys are being called about. Maybe they're guards, maybe they're right tackles. They're not necessarily that prototypical left tackle who can, block the passing game, block for the running game. Seeing what Andrew Whitworth could do for the Rams for the last 5 years, you're not really seeing those tackles here like Neal and Ekwonu. Maybe they will be. I'm not throwing out. I'm not talking about the future futures of these players. I'm only talking about these players as prospects, which is what I will always do at Seaside Joe. We're talking about prospects. That's it, and it doesn't say that, Charles Cross won't be a great left tackle at the NFL. What I'm talking about is Charles Cross does not compare as favorably as a left tackle as somebody would, even Penei Sewell, who isn't even playing left tackle for the Lions. The Lions used a top 10 pick on a right tackle when they drafted Penei Sewell. It's becoming more common to do. Taylor Lewan was a left tackle, and then the Titans picked Jack Conklin, in the top 10. It's not that out of the realm of possibilities now, teams picking, right tackles. Charles Cross is a left tackle, he's pass blocking left tackle, and Mississippi State throws it more than any team in college football. So that's why I don't think that Charles Cross is your typical pick for the Seahawks, who we know are going to run the ball maybe more than any other team in the NFL next season. So Charles Cross would be an odd choice there, but he's also the closest thing to a actual left tackle at the top of this draft, because Evan Neal, a lot of people talk about him as like a right tackle. Kwanu, a lot of people talk about him as a guard. And therein lies the rub. You don't take right tackles in the top 3. You don't take guards in the top 5. And it's really hard to imagine these are the premium offensive line prospects in the draft in a year when there are no premium quarterback prospects. So the fact that they're not, an easy 1, an easy 2, even Evan Neal being here at 3, this is NFL Mock Draft Database, the consensus big board. It's not like a end-all be-all of anything at all, but it gives us a sense of where people are presently rating and ranking these prospects. And even Aiden Hutchinson is, he's not being touted, at least, as the next Nick Bosa. He's simply being touted as like, wow, this is a very solid football player with a high floor maybe. And he could, if you were going to say that the best player in this draft was being compared to like Ryan Kerrigan or something like that, I don't know, you would just be sitting there going, wow, okay, so that's this class. Kayvon Thibodeau, why isn't he being projected as like, this is a slam dunk? Because he's not the same prospect that Myles Garrett is. And there is no Myles Garrett here. So when this is your top, when your number 5 prospect is a guy who is simply an athletic projection like Trayvon Walker, or you've got Sauce Gardner, a cornerback, it's surprising that a Cincinnati cornerback is in the running, as a top 3 pick in this draft. It's surprising that a safety tweener linebacker like Kyle Hamilton, as good of a football player he is, and he might end up as the best football player out of this draft class. It's surprising that he could be ranked this high, that he could even go as high as number 2 to the Lions, So it's a weak draft class, and I think that's what people have to really keep in mind, is that the class itself doesn't have a lot to offer at the top of the draft as compared to other draft classes. And this is not me being negative. I think a lot of people confuse that type of talk with negativity, or they just don't want to hear, anything that's a relative criticism unless it's been deemed safe and acceptable by the greater population, I guess, because you're allowed to criticize a quarterback, right? You're allowed to say that Drew Lock is trash. You're allowed to say that Pete Carroll is trash. You're allowed to say, that the Jets are trash. You're allowed to, say all these things about how so-and-so sucks, is blah, 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 relative and compared to their peers. Well, if you have 10 draft classes, one of those has to be number 10, right? One of those draft classes for every 10 years has to be the one that ranked at the bottom. Well, it's been 10 years or so since the 2013 NFL draft, which is unquestionably, the worst draft class of the previous decade. And I think we can say that this one is going to be in the running. I don't know how anyone would argue really otherwise. And you look back at 2013, no quarterback projections here. The only quarterback in the first round was E.J. Manuel, who a lot of people called a huge reach, maybe the biggest reach of day one. And then you didn't get till Geno Smith as the second quarterback taken. That's 2 quarterbacks in the first 2 rounds, 2 quarterbacks in the first 70 picks until you get to Mike Glennon, Russell Wilson's old friend from NC State. So that's how bad the 2013 quarterback class was. And 2022, it could be just as bad. We're sitting here on this end of it and making our own, projections of what we believe, could happen in the future. But I've got nobody sitting here telling me, oh my God, pound the table. Malik Willis he's like the guy that I grade as like a top 5 player in this class. He's going to be so valuable. This is a guy that, no, it's, hey, look, he's got such a high ceiling and the rest of the quarterbacks are so unappetizing that why not just have the Lions go out there, pick Malik Willis, sit him for a year behind Jared Goff or whatever, which we know is never going to happen in a bajillion years. If the Lions draft Malik Willis, Jared Goff is gone and he's out. It may not happen right away, but by week 5 of next season, Jared Goff is off in outer space. There's no more Jared Goff starting for the Lions once you start to bring in that element of another quarterback. And so I don't really see anybody pounding the table for any quarterback as a first round pick. And then when you get around to it, it's like, well, this guy's pounding the table for Malik Willis, but this guy's pounding the table for Kenny Pickett. And she's over here pounding the table for Desmond Ridder. And they're over there, pounding the table for Matt Corral. Well, anytime you can have like this thing where there's no consensus on the top quarterback, anything at time you're stretching it beyond, a factor of 2, I think, and last year you could say like, well, look, there were 5 guys. Well, nobody was really arguing for Mac Jones. Nobody was really ever considering that Lawrence and Wilson weren't going to be 1 and 2. That was never up for debate. The only debate was Lance, Fields, and Jones, but you had the top 2. This year, you've got no top 1. You've got no top 2. You've got no top 3. Carson Strong might be the best quarterback. Sam Howell might be the best quarterback. Freaking Caleb Ellaby might be the best quarterback out of this draft class. And that's what everyone has to be pointing to, I think, more than anything else, is saying like, oh, this is a bad quarterback class. This is a terrible quarterback class, because we're all finding ways to put this guy over that guy and that guy over this guy. It just depends what day of the week that it is. And that's when you've got a really weak class, when you can't come to any sort of consensus like we came to with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. Even a relatively weak group like Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, or Jared Goff or Carson Wentz, nobody was super excited about any of those guys, but it was always those guys. This year, you've got nothing like that. And, it comes down to, oh, well, here's Malik Willis, but, he's not at all. He's completely a projection. I mean, he's got almost nothing on tape other than, wow, this guy is strong and fast, and he plays quarterback, and he needs to work on XYZ, ABC, 1, 2, 3. But hey, Josh Allen exists. Totally different players, totally different sizes, totally different skill sets. But hey, Josh Allen exists. Then you've got Kenny Pickett, and people say, hey, look, yeah, he came through in that last season. He was probably the best quarterback among, all this group here right now. Kenny Pickett's probably the best quarterback in college last year of all these guys, except maybe Desmond Ridder, but a different strengths, different weaknesses, and yet nobody really loves his ceiling. Nobody really loves, it's like, oh gosh, you're going to draft Kirk Cousins in the top 10. Well, maybe Kirk Cousins would be a top 10 pick in a draft class like this. But when you start to, we want to talk about Kirk Cousins and how long it actually took him to become an NFL starting quarterback, let alone whether or not he is a good one at the moment. That is sort of what you're getting with Kenny Pickett. Matt Corral, a guy that going into last year, my guy was Grayson McCall. I said, hey, look, I think this special player that nobody is really talking about is Grayson McCall, but there was this other guy I was looking at, Matt Corral. Nobody was really talking about him either. I looked at him. I kept looking at him. Nothing ever happened. I was never really on board with this idea that Matt Corral was a first-round pick, because he never put it out there. He never showed why he is a first-round pick. It was just talk. Not by him, and he did his job to the best of his abilities. Just, it was always talk by other people. Desmond Ridder, just a very solid guy for 4 or 5 years at Cincinnati. And then when you get to a quarterback class that has nothing interesting to offer at the top in terms of like, this is the guy, you can start to talk yourself into Desmond Ridder because he just doesn't do a lot of things to really disappoint you. He just isn't going to have, if we're talking about guys without a massive ceiling, I mean, you're talking about Desmond Ridder. So, is that someone you take in the first round of an NFL draft at quarterback? Do you even, use your second round pick on a guy like that if you're feeling like this is a player who you can get a very solid backup with low-end starter potential in the fourth round? So I don't know that is the place to go there. Sam Howell, formerly top recruit, great freshman season, and worked his way down out of the conversation as being an NFL quarterback. And again, the only reason that he stays in the conversation is because the other quarterbacks allow him to do that. There's nobody really pushing him out. So you've got the weak quarterback class. You've got the fact that because it's a weak quarterback class, that if in the top 8 picks of, a mock draft, in the top 8 picks of a regular real draft, you can hope that the Panthers take Kenny Pickett. More likely than that is the Panthers probably picking Charles Cross or Ike Ekwonu or Evan Neal. More likely than taking a quarterback, I think, would be the Panthers drafting a offensive tackle, which they've been linked to all along. And I think that, mock drafts, like you see how popular it is, mock drafts, they just can't stand the idea of quarterbacks not going in the first round of the draft. So you got to find your spots, and Carolina is one of them. Seattle is one of them. For some reason, the Falcons get completely let off the hook. The Giants get let off the hook. The Texans get let off the hook. I don't know why, but I don't think that the Panthers, they could definitely draft a quarterback because I don't know why they signed Teddy Bridgewater. I don't know why they traded for Sam Darnold. So I don't know, that I can necessarily predict what Carolina wants to do at quarterback. But overall, I think when you get down to it, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, that these 8 picks will all include not quarterbacks, So you could have 4 edge players and 4 offensive linemen all go ahead of Seattle, and they're sitting there looking at the board and going, well, do we take Jermaine Johnson or Trevor Penning, or do we, take George Karlaftis, all those guys, Devontae Wyatt, you're talking about really getting down into the weeds here. And I think as long as these 8 picks, you really want, if you're Seattle, you really want to see 2 quarterbacks and a receiver and Jordan Davis sneak their way in the top 8 so that you can have Kayvon Thibodeau or maybe Ike Ekwonu, I think, slide down to 9. If somehow, there's all this talk about Trayvon Walker going 1, 2, 3, something like that, even though he didn't play good football at Georgia at all. Maybe that's a guy who at 9 you go, well, screw it. We're in such a position here at 9 that Trayvon Walker is available and the Seahawks are in, not probably competing to win games next season as much as Pete Carroll might like to. So you just say nobody's going to be mad if you draft a very exciting athletic project who maybe you could at least develop into a solid run stopper and, physical disruptor who, he has such an impressive power that, at the very least, I think Trayvon Walker, could be a justifiable miss if that's what happens, a justifiable bust, as opposed to, I think, drafting a less justifiable bust like, a quarterback. I don't think that that's quite as justifiable at this point in Seattle's, building phase. But let's take a look at how the trades could work. I don't even know if how the draft networks thing will go as far as trades. See, here they've got the Lions taking Malik Willis, and I mean, I just disagree with that, but it's what the Seahawks should want to happen, is Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral all finding their way in the top 8, which isn't going to happen, but if that's what does go down, and I can't obviously predict it, you've got this particular top 8, Aiden Hutchinson, Malik Willis, Evan Neal, Sauce Gardner, Ike Ekwonu, Charles Cross, Trayvon Walker, and Kayvon Thibodeau is a very normal, I think that is a very reasonable top 8. Maybe not the order always, but even the order is like kind of fine. Obviously, if the Seahawks saw Kayvon Thibodeau sliding outside of the top 6 or 5, at this point, the Seahawks, I think, would have to consider trading up with the Giants, which these mock drafts, I don't know how easy it is to make those trades in the moment, but if Trayvon Walker and Kayvon Thibodeau were available at 7 and the Seahawks were at 9, and the Giants, we know, want to move out of this pick, if not this pick, we know the Giants want to move out of here. The Seahawks would probably not sacrifice a future first-round pick to move up 2 spots, right? That's not going to happen. But if they get the opportunity to move up for like a 2023 second-round pick, or that might be something that Seattle considers, just because at that point, that Walker and Thibodeau are probably going to come off the board. And if you know that, then you know that you're going to be left with this board. Do you have Thibodeau and Walker rated super higher than Jermaine Johnson, Trevor Penning? This board doesn't look nearly as good as the board looked at pick 7. So the Seahawks are at pick 9, which I just think is this very poor nexus for the draft. People will say draft George Karlaftis. Obviously people will say this is a reach at 9. Not something that really bothers Pete Carroll and John Schneider being called a reach, but I think that it's just, this is the board most likely that Seattle will see if they stay at pick 9. Something where it's like, okay, maybe is Jermaine Johnson the pick? Is Derek Stingley the pick? I can't really say at that point, but I think that trading down is what has to make the most sense for the Seahawks at this point. I've never really tried it. How does the trade work? Exclusive for premium. All right, well, that's something that I did not plan for, but it does sort of make my point for me plenty good here. Teams that would want to trade up, that's one thing that I just wanted to talk about anyway. So we don't really have to pull off the trade, but teams that want to trade up, I think you would have to say are looking for, maybe they do have a quarterback rated fairly highly, like Pickett or Ritter or Corral, and the Seahawks are sitting at 9. Teams would not need to get over the Jets for a quarterback, and they know that, but the Jets are in a position to trade down also. And Washington could draft a quarterback. Minnesota could draft a quarterback. The Texans could draft a quarterback. The Eagles could draft a quarterback. The Saints could draft a quarterback. And then you've got the Eagles and Saints again. And then you've got the Steelers could draft a quarterback. That's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 potential spots to draft a quarterback between 10 and 20. It also, makes it more likely that a team wants to trade up over Washington for a quarterback at 10. And if the Seahawks don't make the move, the Jets probably will. Then the Seahawks just have to decide how far down are they willing to move, and I think that the Seahawks would be willing to move down really far. I think the Seahawks would be willing, honestly, I think that they would be willing to move down with the Chiefs at the very end of the draft, honestly, at the first round. I don't think that the Seahawks would rate this class nearly as highly at the top as they would rate it on day 2. I don't think that the Seahawks are all that concerned about the possibility of moving down from 9 to 26 or 28. I really don't. And I think that is totally up to what the other teams are willing to pay. Are the Chiefs willing to trade a 2023 first round pick to go all the way up into the top 10 and get over the Jets, Washington? I mean, these teams are highly threatening to take a wide receiver. So would the Chiefs be willing, which we know that the Chiefs were willing to trade a future first-round pick to move up from 27 to 10 in 2017 for Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, he's a quarterback. That's different than a wide receiver. But still, if you're looking at the board here, the Chiefs can actually go ahead and use their first-round pick this year and one first-round pick next year, which is very possibly going to be a late first-round pick for them, and say, wow, could we get the number one wide receiver on this board? Could we get Garrett Wilson or Jameson Williams right now? Because you're not going to get it down there. You may not get it here. You may not even get it here, So the Chiefs could trade all the way up here, and I think that's where the Seahawks would get their biggest return outside of what they get this year. It would require that the Seahawks move all the way down, to 28, 29 in the draft of this year. But it would give them 3 first-round picks next year and 2 first-round picks as well. And I think that you can kind of overkill that because as we saw with the Eagles, their 3 first-round picks almost immediately turned into 2 first-round picks this year. So there's always that sort of shuffling, and I don't think that the Seahawks have to, necessarily overrate the quarterback class next year. But I think when you look at the board, it's just like, well, if the Seahawks don't trade up, and this is a very probable top 8, well, what are they going to do? They could take Jermaine Johnson, but is Jermaine Johnson such a huge, massive difference between George Karlaftis, Boye Mafe? I'm sorry, David Ajabo, but your injury is just too serious. Arnold Ebiketie, is the difference between Jermaine Johnson and Arnold Ebiketie so great that you wouldn't want to add a first-round pick next year for the right to just get that guy instead of that guy? And that's what the Seahawks have to consider. But you could also say, well, maybe Washington just wants to jump over, leapfrog the Jets to pick somebody, possibly a quarterback, before one of these teams does. What if Malik Willis doesn't get drafted and instead the pick is Kyle Hamilton, another guy who's not going to help the Seahawks out? What if Kyle Hamilton is this pick and all the quarterbacks are on the board at 9? Then maybe you do have the Texans saying, you know what, let's just secure. The Texans have so many draft picks over the next 3 years. They could just say, you know what, let's just give up a little bit to Seattle, move up to 9, draft Malik Willis. Everyone's going to be happy that we had QB1 and we got Evan Neal out of this. So you're going to have a right tackle. You're going to have the quarterback, the top-rated quarterback in this draft. Everyone's going to say, wow, what a genius move for Nick Caserio, the GM of the Texans, or do the Saints go, hey, we can go from 16 to 9, give up day 2 picks and get the number 1 quarterback off of the board, whoever that would be for New Orleans. The Steelers could go from 20 to 9. I think that the trade down is the number 1 play here for Seattle, and it's just like being in that really odd spot of pick 9. It's almost the least favorable depending on how the top 8 goes, because if the Seahawks were sitting at 6 even, just look. You would have Walker and Thibodeau, or, Ekwonu and Neal, or Sauce, Gardner, and Cross, whatever. It's just like at 6, the Seahawks would have so many more options. At 9, it's like there's a very good chance that all of their top-rated players will be off of the board. All of their blue-chip players at certain positions will be off of the board. So if they don't move up, it has to be a move down. But then it's just like this is a year where it could be so difficult to trade down, especially because we know the Giants want to trade down. We know the Jets want to trade down. We know the Texans want to trade down. We know that the Jaguars and Lions want to trade down. All these teams ahead of them want to trade down too. So if teams start moving up, well, then there goes all the potential buyers for this pick at pick 9, and the Seahawks will have no choice, but to say take Jermaine Johnson, which I'll just do for them. I think that it's just a really tough spot, and that's why the Seahawks probably most likely have to trade down, I think, from 9, and I think they'll trade down from 41 as well if they get the opportunity to, because I think the Seahawks and John Schneider and Pete Carroll would like to have a lot more picks in the middle of this draft. I think this guy, Bernard Raymond, is a guy that they could trade down and target at the end of round 1. You see those picks 30 and 30, 29 and 30 for the Chiefs, I think are very possible trading spots. John Schneider's old team, the Packers, have picks at 22 and 28. Very likely trading spots as well, potentially for Seattle. Picked up Jermaine Johnson in round 1. Here I am on pick 40. Devin Lloyd slipped all the way outside of the first round. a lot of people would jump on that pick because Devin Lloyd's a very good football player. As I've written on Seaside Joe, I just don't think that the Seahawks' number one play here with these 3 picks is to play it safe. You've got such major needs at such premium positions: edge, cornerback, wide receiver, potentially if you're talking about in the future, 2 years down the line, and just the importance of that position as we saw with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and Odell Beckham Jr. last year, with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd last year, with Tyreek Hill, with Devontae Adams. The Seahawks, I think, should extend DK Metcalf, but also prepare for a future without Tyler Lockett past 2022, 2023. And I don't think it's that crazy to put wide receiver in their potential slot there. We know that they're very likely to draft a running back sometimes relatively early. I wouldn't really go after some of these other positions unless it's edge, cornerback, tackle, wide receiver, and we can just expect them to probably draft a running back at some point early. Quarterback can't be the play. Interior offensive line just doesn't do anything for me. And I think for hopefully for most of you out there, I just don't see that the need is so, that is a luxury to take that. And the Seahawks, they don't have any openings right now in the interior of the offensive line. They may not next year either. That is a luxury that even if the Seahawks can get an upgrade, how much does that change the team, change the defense? I would rather double down on edge players or tackles than to take, an interior offensive lineman who's just not going to tilt the field for Seattle very much. We know that the Seahawks are just possibly going to take a running back, and they could get the number 1 off of the board. I think trading down here makes the most sense, but I'm not a premium member of the Draft Network, so I can't do that. Not super in love with the offensive tackles left on the board, which could tell us more about why Seattle may take a tackle in the first round. So that's something that's a little bit difficult here, but I'll go with Abe Lucas just because of, he had a great combine. He had a great Senior Bowl. He may not be the perfect fit for Seattle, but I am left with what I'm left. And I think we just have to accept running back at this point as a possibility. And Breece Hall is a potential 3-down back that could fit for Seattle and for Pete Carroll. It's not my favorite thing to do. That wasn't my favorite thing to do in the world, but I did feel like I had to do it for the Seahawks if we're being real about what Seattle could do. And I think it would be great to pick a running back here at 72 or after they trade down, which is probable. Maybe expect a trade down and then Dameon Pierce of Florida, something like that. As you can see, Kenneth Walker fell all the way to the 3rd round, but that's because these sites, they just hate running backs. They feel like it makes them look stupid to certain people that I have no interest in making like me. I don't care if people dislike me because I say something nice about a running back. So I'm not going to be influenced by people talking shit about, drafting a running back. Couldn't care less if you think I'm stupid. The Seahawks have drafted Jermaine Johnson, Abe Lucas, and Breece Hall. Probably wouldn't get them very good grades, but plenty of needs still remaining for Seattle. Cornerback Cam Taylor-Britt fits a lot of boxes for the Seahawks, so wouldn't be that crazy to have Cam Taylor-Britt, I think, taken at this spot. Wan'Dale Robinson, hey, if you want it, Will Levis, the quarterback from Kentucky, if you want him to be on the Seahawks next year, you could go get Wan'Dale Robinson, smaller guy, lots of crazy catch radius. Hey, I've fallen in love with Khalil Shakir and his game, so why don't I just do that? Because who cares? Jalen Tolbert, Calvin Austin, George Pickens, John Mechie. See a lot of wide receivers falling out here. Carson Strong going all the way down to pick 80, which is why I don't think the Seahawks should draft a quarterback in the first round. I don't think they should draft a running back in the first round either. But you see Carson Strong all the way down there at pick 80. Could be the best running quarterback in this class. So that's what I have done for the Seahawks. They mostly wanted to talk about trading down and why that's probably going to happen. As you can see, the picks for Seattle: Jermaine Johnson, Abe Lucas, Breece Hall, Khalil Shakir. 3 on offense, and an edge player. There's no way that out of these first 3 picks, there's just no way the Seahawks come away without an edge and an offensive tackle, and then everything else is kind of just like up for debate. But edge and offensive tackle have to be the first 2 picks or 2 of the first 3 picks, barring a very significant player falling at another position to a place where he was such a good value that Seattle simply could not say no. That could happen, but I think that the Seahawks will definitely come away with an edge and offensive tackle, and then running back, wide receiver, cornerback, a pass rushing interior defensive lineman if they can find one. Mostly just want to talk about, trading down, probably going to happen. Weak draft class, adding capital in the day 2, adding capital in 2023. Those are going to be Seattle's top priorities. Go to seasidejoe.substack.com, subscribe, free Seahawks newsletter, subscribe to this channel, and tell a friend about Seaside Joe.